trade-offs. That's the language that you and all of your project managers should use when working with the organization's executives and project sponsors. That's the only way project managers can be effective dealing with people who outrank them by a whole lot. So we'll explore the tools of quantifying trade-offs so that you are being polite and cooperative and slightly annoying every time somebody asks you to change a project, change the scope, change the duration, change the staffing. You're saying, well, of course we can make that change, and the consequence is we increase the duration of the project 2 weeks. Is that the trade-off you want? Good project managers, program managers, and portfolio managers even more so, never talk about just one side. Someone says, can we change the date? Well, a project has 4 corners that we're going to quantify. The measure of success, which you now know is a number, and the budget, and the duration, and the level of risk, as we talked about, calculated from our PERT estimates. So we can have a project that has a measure of success of 90% of the phone calls answered within 120 seconds, and a budget of $200,000, and a duration of 7 months, and a risk level. We've set the estimates for the work at 60%, and those are the 4 quantified corners of the project. If an executive wants to change one of those corners, at least one other of the corners will change. The sponsor wants to go, doesn't want to have 120 seconds as the response time, but wants to go to 60 seconds response time on the phone calls. Well, that may increase the duration. It may also increase the budget, and we have to present the trade-offs to the executive covering those things. We never deal with just one corner. This makes you slightly annoying to deal with, but after people get used to it, you avoid those problems of having changes made to your project which makes it not feasible, and you don't get any compensating adjustment to budget or duration. That's what we want to avoid, is projects we know are going to fail on the day they start. So let's get into the details of these trade-offs, and then at the end we're also going to talk about earned value, which will add on to the tracking we talked about earlier, and is going to be your primary tool for scanning the portfolio every week. Every time one of your project managers comes to you with a completed project, you're going to do your portfolio manager review before it goes anyplace else, before it goes to the evaluation committee, to make sure that we indeed have an optimized plan. And you may not get into the details of all the assignments and all the estimates, but you're certainly going to look at the schedule and the high-level achievement network for optimization. And what you're looking here during this review is the predecessor network as parallel as we possibly can make it, because that reduces risks on projects. And if I can take a section of a project schedule that has just a choo-choo train sequence of finish to start predecessors, well, slippage on any one of those is going to push the duration out. What I want is parallel paths with as much stuff happening as possible, because that gives me the opportunity to shift resources in response to a problem. So you're going to look for fine-tuning as your portfolio manager review or program manager review. And then after you do that, you're going to review the trade-offs that your project managers have put together, because you do not want to be presenting project plans with a sort of, this is the only way we can do this thing. Executives don't respond well to that. So you want to have, as a part of your protocol and your process with your project managers, is they go into a presentation or initiation meeting with principal trade-offs. And I think the good target is to say they come in with the way they want to do the project, the MOS, the budget, duration, and risk as they planned it. And then they also have a version, a model, an alternative that is 20% faster duration. And there's going to be increase in budget probably, maybe even lowering of the measure of success to do it faster. Why do we want an option which finishes 20% faster? Because in every project approval presentation since the dawn of time, executives have asked the question, how can we do it faster? And if you don't have an answer, if you don't have trade-offs that'll let them cut a fifth of it off, they're going to cut off a fifth anyway and not give you any compensating budget or extra resources. So we want to have these trade-offs, so if they ask those questions, we have an answer. And maybe we have a couple answers. Finish 10% faster, finish 20% faster, finish 25% faster. Your project managers are going to object. Well, that's not the way I want to do this one. And the answer is, well, what we want is a successful project. It may not be done exactly the way we want to do it, but we want to have a project that deliver the scope on time and on budget. So we present these options so we don't get put into a small box. So you're going to review the optimization. We'll talk about that in detail. You're going to review the trade-offs, principal trade-offs your project managers have put together, because those ideas, those alternatives they're going to model for you is going to not only get you through the approval process, but that thinking is going to be something you'll use every week on the project. Every time you have a variance, we'll be looking at trade-offs when we have to make changes. Every time we have a change request, we'll be looking at trade-offs. So we establish the logic and the thinking with the executives, and then we use it every week of the project. The attitude you want to take during the review of your project manager's optimization is that there is no free lunch improvements left in the project schedule. So you want to go through it and make sure that we're finishing as soon as possible and making the best possible use of our resources. And that's where you'll use slack and delay Gantt charts, which show you the slack on every task and the delay on every task. And what you're looking for is opportunities to shift resources from non-critical paths that have slack, obviously, that's by definition the case, from non-critical path tasks and paths to the critical path, because that's how we shorten duration. And if we have a resource that's working on a task that has 3 months of slack, in other words, it can finish 3 months later than it's currently scheduled to finish without affecting the completion date of the project, we may want to look at taking resources off that task, if they can do the work, and shifting them to a critical path task taking place at the same time, and thus shorten the duration of our project. And that's what you're looking for when you do your fine-tuning review, is opportunities to shift the resources and finish sooner, opportunities to reduce the budget, but none of these free lunch changes has a trade-off. You're not looking to finish faster but have to hire consultants. That's a trade-off. We're looking for free lunch improvements where you can change one corner without affecting any of the other three. You need to do this for your project managers, but very often they get so close to the details they can't see the big picture, and that's what you should do for them, is provide them a big picture view of how to take some free lunch improvements in the schedules they've prepared. Okay, you've done your fine-tuning analysis. You've looked at the predecessors, the resource assignments. You haven't found any unnecessary predecessors. So the plan is optimized. And then you're going to work with your project managers on trade-offs. When you're training them, and when you have new project managers that you have to develop, you have to teach them that trade-offs always have two sides. We're not looking to, run to the executive and say, oh, I can cut 2 weeks off the duration. Those are changes they should take when they optimize it. When they're dealing with executives, every change to the project has a trade-off. At least one other corner of the project is altered. So if I want to decrease duration, I may have to increase budget, or I may lower the confidence level of the risk and go from 60% certainty in the example we're talking about to 50% certainty. And then I can shorten the duration. But there's a consequence to every change. And that's the message we send consistently across every project. Every one of your project managers is taking the stance, we fine-tuned this plan, there's no slack, there's no way to make it better. Here, I'll show you all the details. So we have an optimized plan, and now any change you want to make, and you can certainly make changes if you want, but every change is going to have a trade-off. And if you want to shorten the duration, you're going to have to give me more budget, lower the measure of success, lower the confidence level on the estimates, but there's always a trade-off, compensating trade-off for any change you want to make. And that is annoying in the beginning to executives, and then they get used to it, and you break the habit of them going around telling project managers, oh, you can find a way to finish 2 months earlier. We have to break that habit, and we say, yeah, we can finish 2 months earlier, but here's what we have to do. Here are the trade-offs. So that's the message you and your project managers have to send to everybody who talks about changing one of your optimized plans. All right, now let's talk about the mechanics of doing these trade-offs. We don't just go in and take a copy of our optimized project schedule and make a whole bunch of changes and see what happens to the budget and duration. What you want to do is start with your optimized schedule, save that, call it Archive 1, and then make a new version of the plan and call it duration minus 20%. And you save the schedule with that name. And then in that version, what you're looking at is duration changes. And you're not going to be concerned here about whether we have, as an example, available resources. We're going to look at, for duration changes, the longest tasks on the critical path, because that's where we can make the most reduction of the duration, and see if adding resources to those tasks will shorten the duration. And so we're modeling adding one contractor full-time, adding a second contractor full-time, gives us a duration reduction in the project of 14 days. And we're keeping notes on how much each change impacted the duration, and when we're finished, we save that duration copy of our project schedule that has approximately a 20% reduction in the overall project duration. And you've got notes about what changes you have to make to your baseline schedule in case the executives want to implement that option. So we have an archive copy of our optimized plan, and then we'll have a different copy with our duration trade-off in it. We've just talked about the first kind of duration trade-off, which comes from crashing the plan, which is the project management lingo for adding resources to critical path tasks. Obviously, it would never, ever make any sense to add resources to a non-critical path task. That will simply increase the cost, or it may increase the cost, but it certainly won't shorten the duration. We want to be adding resources to the critical path tasks and watching the critical path, because at some point, as you shorten the CP, suddenly those tasks will no longer be critical, and some other path will have a longer duration, and you'll have to shift your focus up to that and add resources there. So that's our crashing of the plan, adding resources to critical path tasks, and we usually filter the whole project schedule on critical path. So if it changes, suddenly we have new tasks showing up because those are now critical after the last couple of changes we have made. So that's one tactic, crashing the schedule. Our second strategy for shortening the duration of our project, for developing our duration trade-offs, is to fast-track the project. And now we've looked at our predecessor networks to make sure there are no unnecessary predecessors. When we fast-track, what we're doing is using our slack and delay diagram again, but we're looking for critical path tasks, no sense working with anything else, where there's a finish to start predecessor relationship, and we can accelerate it so that successor starts a little bit early. Classic example is doing design and then construction, whether it's a house or a software program. And usually we have a finish to start where the design has to be done before we start the construction or the programming. When we fast track it, we start the construction a little bit before the final design is approved. Is there risk there? Absolutely. That's the trade-off. Is we are accelerating that successor, and the risk is if there are changes to the design in the last couple of weeks, we might waste all this work that's letting us start early. So fast tracking assignments and trade-offs give us a trade-off we express by we can finish two weeks early if we fast track the programming of Module 17, but that gives us a trade-off we have to all acknowledge, that if you make changes to the design in the last couple of weeks, we're going to waste some effort and have to start over, which will increase the duration and increase the budget. So that's the trade-off to this fast tracking way of shortening the project duration. You and your project managers all have to realize on these duration trade-offs that we are not looking to eliminate all slack from the project schedule. That would be, one, very risky, and two, might not shorten the overall duration. The other thing we have to keep in mind is we're going to identify through our risk management process, certain tasks in the schedule that carry a high degree of risk from the outside world, or from our suppliers, or from technology, or government regulation, whatever the source of the risk. It's outside the project. It's not our work estimates. We've accounted for those separately. So we're going to identify tasks that are high risk, and what we would really like to do is have high risk tasks not be on the critical path, so that if we have an overrun on them, we'll spend more money. We'll have an overrun on the budget, but the budget overrun will not also cause a duration overrun. So one of the mitigation strategies when we have risks is to leave the slack on a high-risk task alone, and we may even increase the amount of slack by adding resources to that task or to its predecessors or successors, so that the path has more slack and we have a buffer. We have insurance against overruns if the risk event actually does occur. Another kind of trade-off we want to talk about, and again, we're going to save a new version of the software schedule, and this one labeled risk. And here, we're not going to be dealing so much with individual tasks. We've done that in our risk management plan. We have our risk responses. But we've also done our estimates, our PERT estimates, at a consistent level of confidence. So in that PERT calculations, you'll recall, we set the confidence level at 60%. So there was only a 40% chance on tasks of an overrun. Now we could also set it at 70% or 80%. Our template that we gave you will do all those options. But you're going to have one confidence level for the project as a whole. And the first time you start trotting out that risk data, the sponsors are going to go wacko, because they're going to say, I don't want 60% confidence. I want 100% confidence. And this is when the education process has to start. And you're saying, well, certainly we can schedule the project and have resources such that we have 99.9%. I can't, 100% would be perfect, and we can't go there. But I can give you 99.9%, but instead of 43 people on the project team, I'm going to need 430 people on the project team, which means a whole bunch of other projects are going to have to get canceled because we'll have all the people. We need to pad up the resources to move to that higher level of confidence. So increasing the confidence level has a trade-off, and that is that the budget goes up and the duration goes up. Because instead of, as an example, we have a task, we estimate it, we have our 3 estimates in the PERT, we estimate it at to make the math easy, a 10-week duration, and then we apply our 60% confidence factor. You remember the mean and the standard deviation and that Z factor that we talked about? We apply that formula, and we put the task into the schedule at 12 weeks instead of the 10-week best guess estimate we have. So we're a little higher, and that gives us more certainty. It also increases the budget and increases the duration because we're scheduling more work. If they want to go from 60 to 70, you're coming in again with options modeled. So you're going to do your risk analysis at 60%, at 70%. We usually don't bother here at 4 p.m., don't bother with 80% because the resource requirements are way too big. But you certainly have the mathematics to go there. And you also may go at 50% and 40%. And I've had a lot of executives thinking they were saving money and finishing sooner want to approve schedules at 40%, and I'm saying to them, just remember, we're talking about 2/3 of the time this project's going to be late and over budget. Is that what you want? Because I'm going to put those odds in the broad brush plan and in the documentation for project approval that this project is scheduled with only a 40% chance of finishing on time and on budget. People don't like that. But that's the reality of the thing, and the risk and the confidence level stuff is tricky. Executives think if you don't show them the data, that the project schedule has a 100% chance of finishing on time and on budget, and if it doesn't, it's because you screwed up. The fact of the matter is, most projects get launched with a 30% chance of finishing on time. Why? Project manager goes and talks to the team members in the cubicle and asks for their best guess estimate. Well, if they've been around more than 2 days, they pad that estimate. And the project manager, in normal course, you wouldn't do this, but the project manager, being very short-sighted, cuts the estimate. Now, what happens the next time when the project manager goes to that person? They increase the padding factor, and the project manager has to increase the slash. Sponsors do the same thing. They get used to being able to arbitrarily knock 2 months off the schedule with no consequences. And what we're saying here is, if you don't want to change the MOS, and you don't want to have it take longer, and you don't want to spend more money, but you want to raise the confidence level, then we're going to document the impact on one of those or all of those other corners, because the project is no longer reasonably feasible. We don't have a 60% chance of success. That idea, that mindset that a project is not 100% certain is a very good one to instill in people's minds, because that affects the number of change requests they generate, or the change request attitude. When they come to you with a change, they're expecting some trade-off, and that's what you want. You don't want people walking in thinking you can cut a month off with no consequence. So this risk trade-off, people may not ever actually approve going to a lower risk level, but it certainly educates them in terms of how sensitive the project is to changes in those 4 corners: MOS, budget, duration, and the risk. Our next kind of trade-off is the budget trade-off. Now, when we did duration trade-offs, we dealt only with critical path tasks, because there's no sense talking about the other non-critical tasks. When we did risk, we talked about the project as a whole. When we do budget trade-offs, we're talking about every task, every achievement in the project schedule, because they all contribute to cost. So, on the budget, we have sort of 2 strategies we're going to pursue. One is we're going to start with the tasks or the achievements with the highest budget and look at options for reducing the cost of those particular achievements. The way we reduce cost is a couple of ways. If we can reduce the number of hours worth of work, that would reduce the cost, particularly if we could, as an example, a make-buy situation, do less work internally and buy the software, buy the plumbing facilities that we need, buy them outside rather than do it ourselves. If we can save money, that would be a way of reducing the budget. We may also, though, have some trade-offs. Right? We always have trade-offs. And the cost of going outside for softwares, we may not get exactly what we want. And we may have to lower some of the achievements that are dependent on that software or on that plumbing fixtures we're going to buy outside rather than make. So we always have to look at the quality impact of going to a contractor, going to a vendor versus doing it ourselves. The second strategy for reducing the budget is to substitute expensive resources for cheaper resources. Now this can be a real fertile area, particularly when it's consulting hours that you cut. And the strategy that we always want to look at is, can I have some of my internal people do some of the work? As an example, usually when you have consultants in a project schedule, you sort of automatically plan for them to do all the work. Then you look at the cost and you're saying, wow, that's a third of my budget. Can I craft this particular achievement so the consultants manage our people? So rather than paying $150 an hour for their recent college graduates, we use our own recent college graduates that cost us $40 an hour, and we save a great deal of money and get them trained in the bargain. And we're using the consultants to supervise the work, not do it all. Now, do the consultants like this? Of course not. They would like to have you pay for all of their people, but when it's a choice of getting the job or not, they will often go for this, particularly in a competitive market. So this is a good option. The trade-off we have to be careful of is the level of guarantee we get from the consultant may go down, the level of responsibility they'll take for the work may go down, and the quality may go down too. So those are potential trade-offs when we substitute cheaper resources for more expensive external resources. But those are the two trade-offs we want to look at when it comes to reducing the budget. The aim is the same. We want to be able to walk into that approval presentation with changes, trade-offs that reduce the budget by 20%, just like we reduce the duration by 20%. So you have those answers when people say, how can we do this cheaper? The one budget trade-off we have to watch, as in your wily executives will try this, is they want to go in and cut the work estimates on various tasks. Now, why would they pick that particular one? Because if I cut the work estimate on a task, reduce it from 100 hours worth of work to 50 hours worth of work, I do two things. If it's a critical path task, I shorten the duration, and I certainly lower the budget. So targeting work estimates is something that wily executives will do, and executives who are used to having project managers come in with padded up project plans will also focus on that too. So this is a battle you're going to have to fight. And the way I think we fight it is to say that estimate came from the person who's going to do the work. We had them do 3 estimates. We talked about the work. That person is committed to finishing the achievement in that time. If you cut it in half, I'm going to lose all of that commitment. And today, that change would make the project schedule look like we're going to finish early. What it, as a practical matter, means is you give me a project team member who thinks they've gotten sandbagged, they have no chance of succeeding, and what kind of level of effort do you think I'm going to get from that person? And if you do the same thing on a bunch of my tasks, you're going to do the same thing of costing me the enthusiasm and motivation of the team on every one of these tasks, and I don't think either of us want that. So if you want to pretend we can finish early today, fine, you can cut the work estimate, you're the boss. But I'm documenting that we now have a 21% chance of finishing on time and a 79% chance of being late because you've done this. I'm not going to commit to finishing to this pretend completion date that would result from slashing all those estimates. As you may gather, I've given this speech a couple of times, and you think you need to come on a little bit strong because executives will play that game till they're blue in the face, thinking they've got you committed. And when you're saying you can do what you want, but you've now gone from 60% certainty to 21%, and I'm going to document that so there's no misunderstanding at the end when we're 6 months late. You got to play the game that way, and hopefully you have the juice to be able to talk to people that way when they try and do that to you. The last trade-off, and the most important one, is the MOS trade-offs. And the main reason we want to have a measure of success with a metric in it is so we can increment it. Because as you think about it, if we have a project that has a measure of success of we answer 90% of our phone calls within 120 seconds, well, we have the option of saying of changing the MOS to we only want to finish 70% of the phone calls within 120 seconds, or 70% of the phone calls within 180 seconds. We can lower all the metrics, but then we go back through our project schedule and our high-level achievement network, and we lower the achievement for each of the high-level achievements because we may not need as much software development, we may not need as much training of our people. These take time, but when an executive says to you, oh, we need to finish in 6 months, not 9 months, well, as a practical matter, the only option you've got is to cut that MOS, all the high-level achievements, all the sub-achievements, re-estimate everything, and come up with a budget and a duration and a lower measure of success that gives the executives what they want. What you don't ever want to do is get caught in the situation where the executive says, I've got to have that in 6 months. And you say, we can't do that. You can always craft some option with much lower achievement, much higher budget, to give the executive something in 6 months. Now, if they say, I want it in 6 months, I don't want to pay more than $10,000, and you can't change the measure of success, then all we're left with is the risk trade-off, which is now we have a 1% chance of finishing your project on time. And you have to play the game that way because talking trade-offs, talking 1% chance of success may make them very upset with you in the project approval meeting. But that's better than having them justifiably angry at the end when you haven't met a commitment you made. So that's the trade-off, and as a portfolio manager, you need to play this game very directly and with a lot of data. You're not trying to just run them over with aggressiveness and assertiveness. You have data behind every one of the statements you're making, and that's a pretty good position to be in when there's conflict with someone who's at a higher rank than you are. All of the techniques we've been talking about, you'll use during project approval, and you and your project managers will use them every time you have a change request. Every time you have a variance, something finishes late, something finishes early. You're going to do the trade-off analysis we have just talked about, modeling options like we've just talked about, and that's the way you go to the sponsor with a change request and you say, yeah, the people in marketing want to add this training program. It will increase the cost of the project by $7,000, and it will increase the duration by 2 weeks. Do you want to approve the change? So you're always presenting the trade-offs of every change that comes to you, and that puts you in a very good position. You're not arguing with people about the value of the training class in this example. You're simply quantifying for the executive, here's the change request, it'll cost this much, it'll have this impact on the budget, and then you're making the one judgment that the project manager or portfolio manager has to make, is to say, it'll cost this much, it'll increase the duration, but we don't need it to hit the MOS. And then if the sponsor approves it, they're doing it with no particular tie to the achievement of this project, and you always want to document those recommendations on the on change requests, because a lot of times they're good ideas that you don't need to hit your measure of success, and that's the judgment you have to make. while you're using all of these trade-off tools every week when you have change requests, every week when there's status reports that show variances, you're also going to use earned value. And earned value is a very sophisticated tool that is of primary use to portfolio and program managers. I would not try and teach your executives to look at earned value tables, because that's going to be a thankless task. It's complicated, but it is made for situations where you have to scan through results and decide where the problems are and what problems can be fixed and what problems are spilt milk. And those are the kind of judgments you have to make across the whole portfolio of projects. So you'll be dealing with earned value calculations right out of your Microsoft project. Next module we'll talk about how we roll up all the projects and combine them into one big schedule. And every week you'll look at the earned value report for every project in your portfolio. And you'll be dealing with, it's a complicated set of ideas. Schedule variance, which doesn't mean we're ahead or behind schedule. What schedule variance tells us is, are we as far along, is our percentage complete as of today, what we planned for it to be as of today. Everything in earned value is as of the current Friday, the date of those status reports. And so if you are 10% complete and your baseline schedule calls for you to be 12% complete, you're going to have an earned value variance, a schedule variance of $45,000. You say, well, how the heck can I talk about a schedule variance in dollar terms instead of days? Well, what that $45,000 means is you've spent $45,000 less than you planned to spend as of today. So you'll be looking down your earned value data, looking for large schedule variances, because that will tell you what tasks are behind and how much behind they are in terms of the work that hasn't been done. Exceedingly valuable piece of data. You'll also have cost variances that tell you this. If we have a $1,000 cost variance as of today, what that means is we have spent $1,000 more than we planned to spend as of today. So I'm looking at costs and schedule variances separately. I avoid the situation in the usual Gantt tracking where cost variances and schedule variance can hide each other. And I'm surfacing those tasks where you want your project managers to pay a particular attention, and you're doing it from a report that you can scan. Even with a 200 project portfolio, you can scan in half an hour and know where all of your problems are and what problems your project managers have to develop solutions for versus what problems you don't have to solve. And having both of those pieces of information is valuable. We've got a software movie coming up that shows you how to read the earned value tables, how to create the data, but this is a tool that you as a portfolio manager, a program manager, will use every week to find out what's going on.